And
Hmm.
I think you're spot on in saying like trade shows have changed. Trade shows used to be, and I think were for the longest time the place where customers would come for information. Like that was the FaceTime they had where they would go sit down at the booth, they would learn about the new products, they would learn about what's going on, they would hear the ins and outs, make their comparisons because they've got their competitors next in the booth next door and this competitor here, and they could take the trade show as like information gathering, and then that informs their purchasing. But I but what happens now is everyone who comes to a trade show, most of the time they know who's going to be there, what's going to be there, what products they have. They've already spent time researching the product. They know there may be some new things that they've just never seen or come across, but for the most part, like the amount of information a customer is coming to a trade show with is extremely higher than it used to be. And so I think what we have to do is adjust our perspective there.
Well, we are back again, our series with Ryan Cash. If you haven't seen any of those, make sure to check them out. They are really good. But Ryan is our new head of accounts here at Structure to Grow. And we've been working through some of his experiences that he has used to grow sales, to do really effective marketing and content creation in the B2B space, in the manufacturing space. He was a part of a team that came into a new industry and developed and launched a brand new product. And he's been sharing some of his insights on how they were successful with that. I've really enjoyed this, Ryan. It's been
Yeah,
super insightful so far. Like I'm not trying to promote our content. I really think that, if you haven't seen it, you really should go back and check out those episodes. Like there's some really good nuggets in there.
yeah, it's been fun kind of talking about, and for me even like a good I think process to like think through some of the things and make sure like and to even like learn from it because some of the things I think we talked about in like the first episode was like a lot of this like I didn't really have like an in-depth strategy of how I was going to do things. It was kind of like, hey, what makes sense to me? And so like
Yeah.
being able to look back and see like, hey, what was successful and what was not successful and how did these things plan out, I think is only beneficial for the future to see like, hey, how can we make use of some of the things that I've just learned but not thought about. um,
Yeah, I think
yeah.
most things you learn them by doing. You
Mm-hmm.
learn through the repetition and the practice. And I think it's really cool the experience that you bring to the table. That's a different experience than I've had. Different from the things that I've done, and at least seeing them from a different perspective. Today we want to talk about trade shows, and trade shows are like the bread and butter of the entire business to business world.
Mm-hmm.
I think for decades, they have been the way that companies have gone out and had FaceTime with potential clients in an industry. And, I think that there's been a way of doing that has been accepted. Uh, but if you do trade shows, and I'm assuming the people that are watching this, they participate in, they're vendors, they sell at them, they attend them, things have changed a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and even before COVID, definitely even before that, and then after coming out of the pandemic, it's nice to see a resurgence in attendance to things. But because people operate a little differently, I think I hear the question a lot. We go to the same shows every year. Is it really worth it? Is it worth the investment?
Mm-hmm.
And should you be going? I think that's a question that we should consider in this conversation. And then two, how would you approach it if you were going?
Yeah.
So, I think there's people that may decide I own the company. Yes, it does make sense for me. Now what should I do to maximize it? And there are going to
Mm-hmm.
be people who's like, the leadership says we go to this trade show, but I'm the salesperson, I'm the marketer, I'm the person in charge of it. How do I maximize this? Because it's on our calendar, whether I agree with it or not.
Right.
Um, so, what has been your experience with trade shows, that's really what I'm interested in hearing about. I think there'll be more time to hear my anecdotes and bring Nikki in and talk a little bit how we've helped people have success at trade shows. But
Mhm.
what is your experience with this?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to remember if we talked about this episode 1 or episode 2, but I think in episode 1 we talked a little bit about how buying patterns for people have changed. And
Mm-hmm.
I think you're spot on in saying like trade shows have changed. Trade shows used to be, and I think were for the longest time, the place where customers would come for information. Like that was the FaceTime they had where they would go sit down at the booth, they would learn about the new products, they would learn about what's going on, they would hear the ins and outs, make their comparisons because they've got their competitors next in the booth next door and this competitor here, and they could take the trade show as like information gathering, and then that informs their purchasing. But I but what happens now is everyone who comes to a trade show, most of the time they know who's going to be there, what's going to be there, what products they have. They've already spent time researching the product. They know there may be some new things that they've just never seen or come across, but for the most part, like the amount of information a customer is coming to a trade show with is extremely higher than it used to be. And so I think what we have to do is adjust our perspective there. Like I've been to a lot of trade shows, probably more than I want to be able to claim. But it's always interesting. I think for me, it has always been a really good chance to network with people.
Mm-hmm.
And the very first trade show I ever went to, this was like new to sales, new to marketing, new to product management. Like I am the contractor guy, and then like they stick me in this booth, and like my only perception of trade shows is I used like as a kid went to like 2 or 3 with my dad who was like the VP of sales for a big company, and like I sat in the booth while he like did his like sales pitch to like the traditional like view of
Yeah.
what a trade show is like 20
Yeah.
years ago. And so like I didn't know what I was doing, like, and the first one I went to I did not get, I don't think it was successful. Like that is my honest opinion of my performance at the first one. Like I I didn't meet people. Like I got some information. I think I sold one machine. So like in that sense, great. But like I I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to connect with people. I had this like skewed view where I was like trying to pull people over to like explain like the specs of our machines, and that's not what people wanted. And like it was just it was not good. And so what I had to do was sit down and think like what perspective do I need to bring to these shows, and kind of change my perspective from hey, I'm going here to sell equipment to hey, I'm going here to make connections, to like reinforce some of the connections I've already made online with people, and to network not only with our customers but with other vendors so that I can kind of start and continue to build this like community that I have been trying to build for the last few years.
Yeah. I have a very romantic relationship, romanticized relationship
Mm-hmm.
with events.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the first trade show I attended, I was early in my home building career. Um, it was 2007, and we went to the North American Builder Show.
Mm-hmm.
And my mind was blown.
Mm-hmm.
We were simply not exposed to what existed out there.
Yep.
Even just going to like the Kohler plumbing fixture booth
Mm-hmm.
and the tools and the materials and we just we were built. Dad had been building for decades, but we didn't know anything about what was available and
Mm-hmm.
what was on the cutting edge at the time. That's why that stuff existed, was to like it brought the audience, the couple 100,000 people that attend a show like that, and they get to touch and feel and see the stuff that's out there. Because basically, if your salesman at the building supply place didn't show it to you, you probably didn't know it existed, or you had a friend who used it.
Mm-hmm.
You just did your thing that fit in your community and in the what you'd always done. And so it was like we learned so much. The second time that a event made a huge impact on me, Dad and I attended an event in another, we were in another business later on, and we went and we were exposed to this idea that this business, and I don't know why we didn't know this. Dad was a lifetime entrepreneur. I mean, was definitely a career entrepreneur, and I never saw the business we were doing as anything more than us just doing a trade.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in home inspections, and we went to this event and we met dozens of people who had 7+ figure home inspection companies.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't know that was possible at the time.
Yeah.
Now I know that seems crazy now. When I say that now, and I know the companies, I know people that own $15 or $20 million home inspection companies, which is pretty incredible.
Mm-hmm.
$300 service to grow a company that big. The people only really do one time every 10 years.
Right.
But my mind was blown. It totally gave a perspective on what was possible that I didn't know before. We found out there were other softwares to use for CRM and scheduling and this and that. I sat next to somebody and was like, hey, you need to use this software. It's going to make your life so much easier. And it was like, we were introduced to these things and these concepts and people, and it was like, we would literally not have known any of this had we keep doing what we were doing.
Yeah.
It totally opened us up. The first time that Structured to Grow went to a trade show and got a booth, it's what kicked off the relationships that were our first probably 6 clients.
Mm-hmm.
And we wouldn't have met them any other way.
Yeah.
So I have this viewpoint around events. I'm a huge proponent of events, and I think we need to circle back and do an episode in the future about how to be like a roadmap to successful events in 2024.
Mm-hmm.
It's more than trade shows. It's more than trade shows, and it's definitely something to think about. Now, all that being said, I've worked with a lot of clients who take booths from trade show to trade show to trade show, and 8 out of 10 that they were going to, they were getting like no sales at all.
Mm-hmm.
And they would go and they'd show up and they'd stand behind the booth and they'd be like, this is an utter waste of time. And we spent $2,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 for the booth. We had to ship everything there. We have 3 plane tickets, 5 hotel nights, all this expensive food. Mm-hmm. And we're spending 10 plus. I mean, even like a small company, like a little company going to a trade show, it's like $10,000, like this, and they're seeing no sales from it. And so it's not, I don't want to say like I see it just through rosy colored lenses, but there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. And there's a right expectation and wrong expectation. And, I think the sentiment that I see or the world that I'm looking through is like in these niche down industries like pressure washing. Mm-hmm. The same people come to the same shows, the same vendors, the same attendees, come to the same shows every year, and it creates a different landscape. And you definitely need to be asking yourself, like, does this make sense for us to be here? And I think a lot of companies, especially in these niche industries, like not where you're doing like the big home builder show or you go to Connex. I went to Connex this year, which is like, we should just talk about that sometime. Right?
Yeah.
That is insane.
Yeah.
But these small niche shows in these niche industries, what I hear people say is like, well, I don't really get anything out of it, but I'm afraid if I don't go, people will think I don't exist anymore.
Yeah. I think if you so usually like shows, like most shows will have like the highlight reel from the year before, right? They'll be like, hey, here's what's going on. And if you watch those and like listen to what the attendees are saying, usually there's at least someone who says like, hey, why'd you come this year? Like that's at least a handful of the questions that are in these like post-show interviews. I would bet that if you watch like 10 or 20 of these videos, not a single person says, oh, I came because I needed to buy a new machine and I would get a discount there. Like that's not what's happening. People aren't going there to buy things. What they're saying when they're leaving and doing these like post-show interviews is, I like to come every year because I get to spend time with my peers and we get to talk about like talk shop and talk about what's working, what's not working. I get to hear from good speakers and get like free education, and like that's always the answer. It's usually somewhat centered around like networking with other people.
Right.
And so I think, and this is what I think made that first trade show that I went to a failure, was like I went in with the goal of being sales. So I went being the sales guy. So I went like completely against like my whole like mindset of what I went out to create online, which was don't be the sales guy, be like the helpful expert. And I like pushed that completely in the corner at that first trade show and just like bombed. But then like took that information and started things like, okay, no, what do people actually want? Like, how about instead of trying to focus on like pulling someone in for a sale, let's pull them in, let's teach them something, let's give away free information, let's teach a class, let's do like whatever it may be, and use that as a a jumping point to build these relationships. So when that person is ready to buy, that hey, at least I'm their list of names of people, or hey, they trust me now. I've given them some free information. Now they're coming to me to want to purchase something instead of me having to like coax them over into my booth so I can convince them why they should buy this now because my sale price, my show price is going to go up after this week. And I think that perspective was like a huge shift in like not only being successful, but also like viewing what was success at the show.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you did
Mm-hmm.
um, that you found like worked,
Mm-hmm.
helped you be successful. Maybe some like specific things that you tried, and then I want to finish up with what are after observing this. What are some things that like people definitely shouldn't do
Yeah.
at a trade show event because it's going to hurt you, especially if you're a vendor with a booth. So
Yeah.
we'll start with that. So give maybe like let's do like two, three, four things, whatever
Okay.
you kind of like have that like you felt like were helped you be effective.
Yeah, I think maybe one, like number one, which is probably the simplest thing, and this is probably what most like traditional sales and like marketing departments are going to think about. It's like, hey, what's going to be our giveaway? What is, we got to
Yeah,
have something in the booth. Do we give away a hat, or do we give sunglasses, or do we give a pin? Like,
yeah. The swag, like the free
yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
Yeah. Not
and
like a prize, not like a
right,
raffle, but like just like the
yeah,
stuff you get.
yeah.
Yeah.
What's sitting on your table that you give away?
Yeah.
And I think what we did, which I think was pretty interesting. I really like this. Um, I think the key is you've got to be unique, and it's gotta be like I don't want to get into like ins and outs of like how do you pick the right product, but like for us, what it ended up being was a koozie for like so everybody at trade shows most of the time after like 3 p.m. or whatever they open up like the bar and people are getting their drinks. So we gave away koozies, but they were like slap bracelets.
Hmm.
So you have this like koozie, it's got our logo, our website, whatever on it. But we kind of made a joke of it, and it kind of became just a funny thing at a bunch of these shows. Is like someone's walking by carrying their drink, and you just take the koozie and you can slap it on their drink, and it'll like wrap around it, and like whether they want to or not, like now they've got this koozie on their drink, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it was like it was one of those things. Like it was funny and it was unique, and I think it just landed well. Like people just liked it, and then they're easy to pass out. Like I think that's like the low hanging fruit. Like hey, find something you can give away. Like brand recognition. People like free stuff, so why not stick your logo on it and give it away?
Yeah.
Is that going to make somebody buy from me? No, not at all. But what if I make that connection with them now? When I send like my follow up email, I can say like, "Hey, remember that koozie? It's got our website on it. If you want to check it out, scan the QR code on the koozie or whatever it gave you." Like it's a enablement tool, not like a driving sales force or whatever it might
Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
Um, I think another thing, probably there's two other things I can think of that made it successful. And the first one was I went from I think that first like show where we were a failure, I had like our our machine sitting in the middle of the booth, and on the table I had like one of the bottles of each of our chemicals with like a little flyer that told about them. And so we had like six different surfactants and chemicals and stuff that did things. And like my expectation was like, oh, someone's gonna come by and like pick up the bottle and like look at it and read the product label and like ask questions about it. But like nobody cared. Like it's another bottle of the hundreds of bottles of chemical that are in the store. So similarly, what I try to do, the first thing we did is like, hey, I want to do a quick video of product comparison or just like showing what the product does. I was like, so show number two is like the next step was let's stick a TV behind it and then show like some time lapses of the chemical working or like whatever, just like the quick visual so people can walk by. And we found a little bit more success with that. Still, like everyone's doing that also, right? And
Hmm.
so finally, as we started to kind of hone in even more as like future shows went on and we changed some things, the next thing I did was bring like an actual product demo into the booth. And but it's got to be unique. You can't just be the guy like, hey, here's the Sham Wow. Here's how it can clean any surface with just water.
And
Like,
wow.
yeah, like nobody cares about. Like, you might be able to pull some people in and they'll look for a second, but like
Yeah.
one of the unique things about our product was so in the pressure washing industry, you use a lot of bleach, and bleach just like corrodes everything. It corrodes your equipment. It's like the number one killer of pumps and equipment, and
Yeah.
so one of our products had a corrosion inhibitor built into it. So if you used our surfactant, then your equipment actually lasts longer. So I took a bunch of glass jars, poured bleach in all of them, stuck some nuts and bolts in them, had like one with just bleach, one with just like bleach and a unnamed competitor soap, and then another one with ours in it. And like so as the trade show went on, as people walk by, like they'll pick up ours, it looks like a brand new stainless steel bolt inside the jar. They pick up the other two, and it is just like cloudy, dirty, nasty, rusty water.
Yeah.
So it was like that was like a good visual for people to like actually get their hands on. They could pick it up, they could shake it around and see, and we could say like, "Hey, I put this in this jar this morning. Here's the difference." Like it, I think people like that like tangible, like visible thing that they can get their hands on and compare. Um,
Yeah. Absolutely.
and then
Absolutely.
And then I think the third thing, which ended up being by far the most successful kind of trade show campaign, was getting away from like the sales pitch completely. So we shifted from sales to like, let's make our presence at this show or at this event about education. So that's when I think we talked last time. I wrote like a 30-page cleaning guide and just I talked to people. I made kind of an announcement from the front of the event and said like, "Hey, I've got this free cleaning guide. Stop by the booth, give me your email address. I'll next week when I get back to my office, I'll send it to you no cost. It goes in the ins and outs of how to clean brick and limestone and concrete and composite decks and wood decks and like here's a free resource. Have it. It is no cost to you, no strings attached whatsoever." Doing that plus teaching classes with the intention of educating and not turning it into like a sales pitch or
Yeah.
like and that's what like most of the trade show classes like you'll get like their like inspiring message and then you'll get their like message about their product. And so like just went completely away from that. I said, hey, I'll use our equipment while I'm teaching the class, but I'm not even going to like mention like, oh, you should buy this because this is so good. It's let me just show you how to use our equipment and use our chemistry and teach you how to clean a roof or teach you how to clean this type of siding. And when we like shifted to like sole education and like free information, I went from like trade show one of I got like 15 guys contact information to send them quotes or whatever to the last trade show. There were probably like 150. It was a small one. There's probably 150 people in attendance, and the next week I sent like 95 emails. I think of follow up. Hey, here is that free training guide I promised. Hope you had a good show. Blah blah blah. We also talked about. I remember you said that you're interested in maybe some new chemistry. Here's the information about
Yeah.
our chemistry. Let me know how I can help. And like 1,000 times more successful than like the traditional, hey, come in here and let me show you why our product's better and let me sell this to you.
I want to like emphasize what you're saying there. You used a term that I want to repeat it just for emphasis. Your intention
Mm-hmm.
with what you're doing, because for a vendor to do a class at a show is not uncommon.
Right.
But what are you doing? What is your intention of that class changes everything because people feel your intention.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what, and it changes how you talk, it changes how you deliver, it changes what you say, it changes the content of it. And when your intention truly is to help instead of sell, you get a totally different result. And I think I love that. I know at the first, and we kind of came in with like a creative mindset. I don't know that we were geniuses or anything, but
Mm-hmm.
4 years ago, we were doing, podcasts, I guess more than 4 years ago, at trade show booths, which no one was doing back then. No one thought to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But then we did education classes too. And like my goal for the class was like, how much value can I give? And when you do that at the end, 10, 12 people, there might have been 100 in the class, 10 to 12 come up and sign up to
Yeah.
do whatever it was, whatever the service was that we had at that time. And I experienced the same thing where the intention is everything. The
Mm-hmm.
like, when we would record with people, there were people I wanted to meet and people I wanted to do business with, but the point of doing the recording was to give them a platform to talk about their product and then give them the content.
Right.
And it dramatically changed how we had a relationship. Then all of a sudden we're sitting down and we're having a meal together and we're talking more and we get on the phone afterwards. And then it becomes them saying, well, I'd like to work with you. What would that look like? And
Mm-hmm.
that's a totally different conversation than when you're like, hey, here's my card. Here's my brochure.
Right.
Here's what we do.
Yeah.
Here's what, it's a totally different conversation when someone says, so what would it look like to work with you? I mean, what could we do together?
Mm-hmm.
And I can't advocate that enough that sometimes it's not the tactic, it's what's in here in your head, that how you're approaching it, not the tactic. It's like, I think with content, it's not should you be on YouTube or should you make a podcast, it's what or why are you doing it?
Yeah.
That
I
will be the
think.
difference in whether or not it's successful.
Yeah. I think people are pretty naturally intuitive to things like that. I'd show you the text if I could. I've got a good friend who just went to one of the big events, pressure washing trade shows, like a week ago.
Yeah.
Um,
Unnamed.
yeah, unnamed. I won't say the name of it, but he asked me, or I asked him. I was like, "Hey," he came back. I was like, "Hey, I just want to see like how'd you like it?" Because this is the first year in 3 years I haven't been to the show. I was like, "Hey, I just want to hear how it went." And he kind of made a lowdown. I was like, "Oh, did you go to any of the speakers?" And his text back was, he's like, "I went to one keynote and one and a half breakouts." And I was like, "Oh man, I'm so like I already knew. Like I could tell the tone. Like that
Yeah.
sounds like it
Yeah.
wasn't good." And I kind of followed up about it. I was like, "Hey, well, like what happened?" He's like, it's like almost every single one was like the first keynote I went to. He's like, I stayed for the whole thing, but it was like this guy telling about how great he was. And he's like, at the end of it, it was, hey, if you sign up for my course, you can kind of be in the network, right? And then you can find out like all the secrets and we'll help you build your company. That was horrible. And he's like, and the rest of them, he's like, everyone I went to was just like a sales pitch for whatever their product was. He's like, it was miserable. He's like, I left them all early because he's like, I couldn't do it. And I think even if they're not coming out and like directly saying it, like most of us are good at like pointing out right away, like, okay, what's the real reason this guy's doing? Is he trying to sell me something, or is he just genuinely wanting to send and give out free information? And I think the ones that do that are the ones where, like you said, afterwards, if that, hey, let's say I go to a class and I just spent an hour listening to this guy who just gave me genuinely good information. He taught me how to do this. I learned a lot. I feel like I can grow my business a little bit better now because of him. And then let's say that same guy now shows up at like the mixer or after the show and he's just like hanging out at the bar, like wearing the same clothes I'm wearing. Like he looks like me. He's not wearing his like suit, his like dress shirt and his tie. Like he looks like he fits in with his customers. Now is the time I'm going to go approach that guy and like you said, let's go talk about like, hey, how can we work together? Or hey, I really like what you said. Can you tell me about like what you guys are doing? Or like, what do you hear? Like, what's your product? And like that conversation for that guy it's an easy sale all day. Like that is, I think, where that's when you can kind of shift over to like, hey, let me talk about my product. You asked me, so let me tell you about what we're doing, how we can help you, and help you find like a solution that we can work together on, instead of him having to go like teach a class and say at the end of it, now that you've heard my 10 minutes about why you can grow your business better, let me show you our product so I can show you like all that is, people hate that. People hate the sales pitch, and I think that
Well,
is,
it
yeah.
defeats the purpose of going to a class. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I went to a conference, a well-known conference, and we're not going to talk about who it was or what it was because I don't
Mm-hmm.
doesn't it's irrelevant. Really well known, like tens of
Mm-hmm.
thousands of people there. And I attended a session by a guy that was putting on this thing, and he was super compelling. I'd heard him before,
Mm-hmm.
and he sold this workshop. It was like this group workshop, and it was all about building a presentation, whatever. And it was expensive for
Mm-hmm.
something that I had zero one-on-one help with anybody. You log on, and there's probably, I don't know, a couple hundred, 300 people that purchased it,
Mm-hmm.
maybe more, maybe 500 people. I don't know.
Yeah.
But you would attend the sessions and you'd work through this whole process. But I thought it was, it was pretty good. It was expensive. You thought you'd purchased it, and they get down, and they like the whole time they're pumping up the finale event, right? The
Mm-hmm.
last session. In the last session, they have like 3 or 4 people on, and the workshop, it was like $2,500 or something.
Mm-hmm.
And the last session, they have these people on, and they spend like all this build up, and it's like 2 hours long. And you get to the end of it, and what they reveal is that you can go do the more involved version of the workshop in person for
Right.
like
Yeah.
$30,000.
Yeah.
And I was so angry at the end of it that I had
Mm-hmm.
spent so much time to do something, and they basically were just like, "Now we know you learned something, but if you really want to
Yeah.
do it right, come do it with us." And it's like and it was like 3 events they wanted you to come to, and they were all like $10,000 a piece to come to,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like, well, I feel cheated,
Yeah.
and I think
Mm-hmm.
there's so much of that out there. We have to think about how we don't do that to people.
Yeah.
And at a small trade show, and I'm thinking about the one that you're at, like the class will be like, how to take your business from such to such, right? It's like, oh, that's an
Mm-hmm.
interesting title. I want to do that with my business. And you
Yeah.
get there and you realize that it was like the bait and switch,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
like, here's the
Yeah.
thing, like,
Going to the class to learn about the class that I can
yeah,
pay for. Yeah.
yeah, or whatever. I need to sign up for the group or the thing or the,
Right.
the whatever. And I think people forget. And this is like a trade show rule 101, or maybe just a life rule, business rule. People do business with people they know, like, and trust. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Your
Yeah.
opportunity at an event is to get to know more people who, if you treat them right, they will like you and leave trusting you. And if
Mm-hmm.
you make that your goal, the end result will be sales. You won't be able to avoid it. If people know, like, and trust you, and you have something that will help them, you have
Yeah.
something useful to them, they will do business with you. And I think that, like, we forget that, like I said, we don't tell them they have to do business with us now, they have to buy right now, that they just won't. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think that that's just a simple rule without being like condescending. I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to finger wag or anything at
Right.
anybody, but it is amazing when you just flip the switch,
Yeah.
what that can do.
Yeah. I think the just like the kind of the rules of like creating content, like you, if you look like your customers and you talk like your customers and you understand their needs, like that is how you be successful. Like if someone came to my booth while we had a show, like I'm sitting here, so in our booth typically is like me and then our like sales guy from our distributor who knows like very little about pressure washing, about soft washing, about like that industry. Like they go to him and talk to him, they're out of the booth in like 10 seconds. They're like, okay, well, thanks for the information. I'll see it. Because he doesn't know like what they need and what their struggles are. But then like, hey, I did the work for 10 years. Like someone comes, we'll talk for 30 minutes. We'll talk for an hour. We'll bring in people. We'll talk about like everything about the hardships of the job. And this carries on to like the mixers afterwards, and like that is how, like you said, that's how you build the trust in the relationship, because now they see like, hey, he's like us. And so I think that might be the good segue into kind of early on setup, like what are the things you don't do
Yeah.
at the show.
Give me a couple
And
that like the stay away froms.
so I think number one is like, in my opinion, dressing incorrectly. And that's like a weird thing to say, because like I don't care. I like, if you look at how I dress day in and day out, like my wife hates it because like I am the like, let me buy my clothes at Costco, like the same place I'm buying my chicken, I'm buying my clothes.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. You get a
but
polo and a pack of chicken. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But I think the reality is like, if I, especially some of these smaller like niche events,
Whatever. Yeah.
yeah, like if I show up to this like pressure washing show and I'm wearing khaki pants and a like a button down shirt and a tie and have like my hair combed over, no one's gonna talk to me. Like they have no interest in me whatsoever, and they're not gonna come to my booth because they like it puts up a barrier that they feel like, I don't like, that's not my type of people. But if I show up, I'm wearing like my work shorts that are all bleached out and a polyester shirt that they all wear in the industry that looks like a NASCAR shirt, and I've got my hat on from whatever Joe's pressure washing that he gave me in Pensacola, Florida, and I'm sitting there like, I'm much more approachable, like, and it's easier to talk, and like I think that takes down a small barrier. It's just like not overdressing. I think probably the biggest one that I think when I first told you this, I think Nikki was in the background and she like gave me the clap, was like, don't be on your phone or your computer in the booth. Like if you are sitting there trying to interact with people and trying to make your name known, get off your computer. And this was a problem I ran into over and over and over again
Hmm.
with our distributor. Was the sales guys would come in, and sales guys, and they're taking calls from other customers and they're taking orders and trying to like fulfill orders on their computer. And I'm like, 30 people just walk by, and like you're in here like trying to do your work. And like I get it, as a sales guy, like you might have specific goals, but like even having my like phone out, if I'm like, even if I'm looking up like something relevant, like if I'm here talking to you like this, and you and I both have a friend who has a tendency to do this, like whether he's listening, like whether you're listening or like whether he's listening or not, you don't feel
Yeah.
like he's there to listen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I think it's the same way with shows. Like people see you on your phone, and like we definitely use our phones as like the comfort, like hide behind. I think like phones in business and coffee cups in church are like the things that people can hide behind, and like it gives the impression that like, hey, they're kind of in their own world. I don't want to bother them. Um, and I think if you can stay off your phone, if you can look and talk like your customers, and then probably the third thing is, I think that hurts people the most, is if it's not like directly and easily obvious what you're doing and what you're there for. Like we had some branding difficulties, I think, with our company. Our brand name didn't lend. It didn't really communicate what our product was, and I see that all the time. You'll like walk by a booth, and like you need to be able in like 2 seconds to be able to know like what their product is. And I don't think you need to know like, not in like a sales way, but like you need to know like what are they about. Like otherwise, you're going to miss some of the people who maybe they did, that one guy who did show up to the show to buy some new chemicals. They walk by and they see a bunch of like information that doesn't like directly relate to what they're looking for. They might just walk by without looking. And so I think it's like the guys who don't communicate well what their product is or what they are about
Hmm.
almost always have like the most difficulty creating connection or creating sales or whatever their goal might be at the show.
One more I'll add to that kind of goes along with the phone.
Mm-hmm.
Traditional booth setup, backdrop, side curtains, right?
Mm-hmm.
6 foot
Mm-hmm.
table across the front. Traditional
Mm-hmm.
booth setup. one of the things that hurts people more than anything is having a barrier between you and the potential customer.
Hmm.
And when you are sitting behind that table while they're walking by, it's not very inviting to come
Hmm.
interact with you. You're in your world, they're in their world, and that barrier acts like a wall between you and your clients. And so like it's exacerbated when people are on their phones and on their computers, but the table itself becomes the barrier. The table itself becomes the like, and what you really want in a trade show is for people, there's very busy aisles, right?
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
want people to exit the aisle where it's noisy, where everyone's moving, and then come into your world and enter into a conversation, enter into dialogue with you directly. And so,
Hmm.
like, hiding behind the table, in my opinion, has just as much negative effect as being on the phone.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and I think the funny thing is like, and I know I did this also, is like you think it's a good thing. You're like, hey, let me put our table in front. I'm gonna put our product on the table. I'm gonna put all of our paper on the table. Like,
Signs, yeah.
yeah. So that way, when people walk by, it's right there in front of them, and I can be right behind it. So when they come to look at my product, I'm right there and I can talk to them. And like, we have this tendency to think like that's a good idea, but you're right. It's what you're doing is you're building a wall that now if they want to get in to talk to me, they've got to get around it and come through the little opening in your 10 foot by 10 foot booth to talk to you. Whereas if you can get a little bit more
Move the
creative with
table.
like, yeah, move the table or get creative with stands or however you're going to set up your product,
Yeah.
then you can invite people in more.
And then I think the anecdote to that, I'm gonna give one more that goes right
Mm.
along with that. It's right in line with that. The other mistake that you make as a vendor is to think that your business is to stay in the booth.
Hmm.
Don't stay in the booth. Like if you have more than one person at the trade show with you, then everyone who's not that one person and then rotate should be
Hmm.
out meeting people where they are, other
Yeah.
vendors, other be in classes, walk
Hmm.
around, be in the common areas, be at the watering hole, go to other booths. Don't it, like I think that was one thing I saw that was just like what a waste. People have three, four, five people that come to the thing and they all huddle behind the booth. And the other thing that happens when you have more than one or two people at a booth is instead of their attention being on the passerby, it just turns inward and they're all having their little
Hmm.
dialogue,
Yeah.
and half of them have their backs to the audience, have their backs to the people walking by, and they're in a conversation. Well, nobody's going to come interrupt your conversation with your colleague,
Right. Yeah.
to talk to you about your product. And so it's like, I think the easiest thing is like send the other people out. Only have one or two people in the booth. Having two people in the booth talking to each other, again, it's just as bad as the cell phone or hiding or whatever.
Hmm.
And that was one thing I saw a lot of.
Yeah, and I think that's a good rule of thumb for like in general, like even online content creation. Like one of the things that I tried to do was, and I think there's some guys like in the pressure washing industry who do it really well, is like give the perception that you're everywhere. Like if everyone from your booth is wearing your company shirt and like someone walks by, like they see one guy in your booth, and then they walk like 20 feet later and they see another guy wearing your shirt, and like
Mhm.
the what you want to do is create this like perception that you are like they see your logo, they see your people everywhere, and same thing online. Like every time someone would post something, every time someone would ask a question, I'm like, for 2 years, I was the first one every time to be like, hey, let me tell you, like, let me answer that question. Like,
Yeah.
not even bring up my product name, but like, suddenly when people were coming to shows, like the last year that I was at the company, like, oh, I saw your YouTube video. I like, hey, I recognize you from Facebook, or like, you're the guy that's like everywhere, and like, yeah, that's the perception I want to make, and so that way, when they do walk into the booth, they feel whether it's like authentic or not, they feel like a connection to you because they've seen your name before, or they've seen your logo before, they've seen like your company name before, and they're like, they have that like connection in their head that they can go ahead and make, and then it makes it easier for them to step into the booth.
It's
You
falling
got all
apart
kinds of
on
stuff
mine
going.
over here. It's
Yeah,
just like absolutely just coming crashing down.
yeah,
Kids, pets, all of it.
yeah.
I think
So
that
I'll
was awesome.
yeah, yeah. I was gonna say I'll keep this one quick. I promise. Probably my one last
Okay.
piece of advice for trade shows
Okay.
is just to have some sort of like follow up, like follow up with the people you talk. And what I recommend is either like on the spot, build a spreadsheet, or take quick notes when you get someone's uh, business card. Like my follow up email the next week is, "Hey Brad, nice to meet you. It's great seeing you at the show. Like, I hope that that hunting trip you're talking about that you're about to have is awesome. Uh, Here's the information that I told you that I would send you. Here's that free cleaning guide that I promised you. If you have any other questions, here's my Facebook, here's my YouTube, here's my whatever page. Feel free to reach out." Or if it's like a specific request, if they ask about like information on chemicals, and it's, "Hey, here's the information. I'm going to give you a call in 3 days to give you time to kind of look over it, and I'll let you know. I'll give you a call to see where you're at." And I think if you can not look like a computer wrote that email of,
Yeah. Or that you
"Hello,
sent to
Brad.
everybody. Yeah.
Did you have a good time at the show? It was great to meet you. I hope
Yeah.
to like
Yeah.
yeah,
Robot
I think
robot
if
emails.
and that goes into our whole like perception of authenticity. Like, hey, it was nice to meet this guy. I took a minute to remember something about him.
So I think this was really, really awesome. I look forward to it. We're definitely going to have to break this whole thing down. And there's so many more trade show events. And I don't want to limit it to trade shows. That's one kind of
Mhm.
event. But there's
Right.
so much more event tactics and advice that we can talk about. So we'll rope our counterpart into the other one
Hmm.
because she is an event master. And we'll
Yeah.
talk a little bit about some more strategies of how to be super successful in events today, and then coming up looking into next year, what are events going to look like and how do we do it different? How do we do it better? Whether you're hosting the event, whether you're co-collaborating at the event, whether you're a vendor at the event, whether the event is a virtual or in person, events are not dead. They're never going to
Hmm.
be dead. But the way that we do them and the ones that we do, we may want to look at different things. And I think the advice that you shared is valuable because it really kind of addresses the like, if I'm going to be at the trade show, here's some things that I can make sure to do and some things I
Hmm.
can make sure to avoid. And there's also simple.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that like in a like I'm like trying to like throw there's great advice, but it's all doable advice is what I'm suggesting. Is it's all something that
Hmm.
any business could go say, "Oh wow, yeah, we could implement that."
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Ryan. This has been another awesome thing, and I look forward to our future episodes. There's so much more stuff that we can cover. I hope people have stuck around for the 47 minutes. I guess we'll have
Yeah.
to pull
It's
some
a
clips out of it because
yeah.
I'm thinking, I don't know
Okay.
who wants to hear me for 47 minutes.
Yeah.
You have to. You have to, but everybody else does
Yep.
it today.
Right.
And yeah, so if you're seeing this, drop a comment below. Like, I'd love to hear your experiences at a trade show, whether you were an attendee. What was a good experience or a bad experience at a trade show, or as a vendor, what was something you did that worked well, and something that you may have like done and realized like it doesn't work anymore, and you're pretty tired of it. I think this is a really great conversation that we need to be having of how do we get better at events because they're not going away, but they are
Hmm.
evolving. So drop a
Good.
comment below. Thanks for watching today. Thank you, Ryan, for sharing your experience and your expertise with all of us. And we'll see you again next time.